Good morning, Toni. Thank you very much for being here for these conversations. Based on your experience in Barbados, in your view, what are the most urgent priorities for a new social contract that effectively meets the needs of workers in the Caribbean?
First of all, we need to find commonality around what is decent work. Barbados has undergone a decent work agenda, and we are in the process of designing a second decent work country program. And I start there because unless we can establish commonality around what are rights, fundamental rights and principles at work, what constitutes adequate social protection, how effective social dialogue is, and so on, then we will likely miss the opportunity to be able, as a social partnership, to form a common agenda on the missions that will be critical to us as a country. So I start there. As it relates to priorities, we have to set priorities around a just transition. And that's not only as a result of the climate issues that the country faces, which are not unlike those of a number of other countries. And it's not only on account of the digitalization, but it is ensuring that however transformation takes place, whatever transitioning takes place, that we are in a position to take workers from where we are now until to where we have to go in the future, jobs of the future, namely. Which brings me to another point. We have been so preoccupied as a people over time with ensuring that the fundamental principles and rights at work are in place. And I said before, I made mention of the decent work agenda. But one of the things coming out of our discussions as a country at the tripartite level that we recognize is important is making sure that people have access to rights at work, and that people recognize what are the responsibilities that come with those rights. But outside of access, making sure that we don't just scrape the bottom of the barrel, the bare minimum, but that there is the sufficiency principle that is applying. So you have access, but what you have access to is enough to take care of you and your family. So therein enters something like the living wage.
We are living today in the digital transformation era, and Caribbean is not excluded from this. So in your view, how can the Caribbean trade unions organizations may benefit better from these new technologies and innovations? I'm thinking about in relation to organizing, representation, but also protection of vulnerable groups, in particular those who are in the informal economy and also in the blue and green economy. How do you see the benefits and how better use these new technologies for the unions, by the unions?
First of all, I would urge my fellow trade unionists not to fear technology in itself. Yes, with advances in technology, there will be loss of jobs. But there's also an opportunity that will likely be created for new jobs. And we have to be forward thinking. We have to be able to prepare our workers for the changes that will take place as a consequence of changing technology. And we have to be able to, as a part of preparing them, help them to embrace those changes and try to seize opportunities. So I think that trade unions have to make sure that our members and their families are upskilled. So digital skills development is going to be critical if they're able to take advantage of opportunities. We have to be able to position ourselves, secondly, at the table where skills for the future and the jobs for the future are being discussed so that we know what they are, where they're going to be, so that we can prepare them. As it relates to organizing, we have to be able to use the technology within our organizing. I know in our union, COVID was very good for that, because the union for some time had been underemploying technology in its processes, and our processes were more physical, one-on-one engagement and so on. But COVID threw us fast into using a lot more technology and making effective use of it, so that in organizing, you find that through the use of digital means, you're able to reach more people than you would if you had to depend on one-on-one physical contact alone. Now, I hasten to mention that the physical one-on-one contact is important, but in terms of reach, getting into the informal sectors, people who will not come to a union meeting and so on, technology is the way to go. So I think that as unions within the Caribbean, our experience has to be no different to unions elsewhere. Seizing the opportunities means being, first of all, aware of what the opportunities are and preparing ourselves to make the best use of them for us and for the people we represent.
My final question to you, Toni, will be to know regarding the new social contract, how do you see the role of the ILO and the tripartite constituent in shaping the design, but also the implementation of this new social contract, having in mind that there will be a very important event this year, the second World Social Summit for Development, but as well from the design of the World Post 2030, how do you see the role of the ILO and the constituent in shaping this new social contract?
During the last 2 days, we have been engaged in a conference around the social contract, which has been very useful, because what the ILO is doing through its ACTRAV office is helping to formulate within the minds of our people exactly what the social contract is and what it involves. So that's the first important thing that the ILO must continue doing: educating, building the capacity of our constituents, the ILO's constituents, to understand and embrace the opportunities and follow the visioning behind the social contract. I mentioned previously establishing decent work country programs. That is very useful and will continue to be very useful in terms of building capacity among the constituents, not only to understand, but to do and to live the social contract, addressing such things as the issues of trust and being able, therefore, to break down the barriers that trust will create, so that constituents, member states and their constituents, can form a common agenda around the issues that are important to them, fully recognizing that what's important in one country may be important in another country, but in order of priority will have different placement. And this brings me to the issue of a common agenda. I think it's going to be very important for the ILO to assist, but on the ground at the national level, for governments and constituents to be able to set priorities around not what the union would want for the union, not what the employers will want for the employers, but what at the end of the day is fundamentally essential for our people, if a sustainable development as an objective is not only going to be an objective being pursued, but an objective that we can possibly achieve. So I believe it is going to be very important on the ground for a number of sessions to be established between governments and the relevant stakeholders to establish what the priorities for the country are, to agree around those priorities, and to establish mechanisms to achieve them. May Day 2023 in Barbados, we started that journey where we signed off on what we call mission objectives, a set of 5 objectives that, after discussions at the individual level, they were agreed collectively among government, employers, and trade unions as the way that we need to go, what we need to pursue as a country. But what is going to be more critical than establishing objectives is making sure that we can set the scenario, set the scene for following through on what we have agreed to ensure that we achieve the outcomes that we visioned out collectively as a body. So I think that the ILO has a role, but nationals also have a role to play in ensuring that the vision of a social contract is more than a buzzword, but it becomes a reality.
Thank you very much,
You're
Toni.
welcome.